Okay. And I want to bring up the slides. There we go. How do I do that? There we go. So I guess that's not playing there. Do that. So now you have the full screen of the slide?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. This is John Marks, and I'm joined by Chaplain Carrie Friedman. This is part of our ongoing Law Enforcement Survival Institute Tactical Resilience and Ethical Policing webinar series. And you'll see on the slide there, it talks about live chat because we would really rather this be more of a conversation than a teaching. But nonetheless, we have some material we'd love to share with you, and we'd love to learn from you as well. So we're going to do these probably about once a month. We've had a hard time locking in a date just because of schedules, but approximately once a month, we're going to be doing these on topics of interest. So I just want to invite you to let us know what topics are of interest to you. You see that Cops Alive is also a co-sponsor here. That is our blogging website where we try to share information specifically about officer wellness and resilience. And this is just part of that. So let's do a couple of quick introductions here, and then we'll just see where we go. So that, I'm going to come back to that because that's our topic for the day. Again, my name is John Marks. I'm the Executive Director of the Law Enforcement Survival Institute. I am the author of the book, Armor Yourself, How to Survive a Career in Law Enforcement, which is specifically a textbook on building resilience and improving your wellness. I'm also the editor of Cops Alive. I was in law enforcement for nearly 25 years. I started doing what I'm doing now when one of my friends from another agency completed a suicide, and really shocked me. And I started talking about suicides and realized we have a real problem in our profession and we need to do something about it because that's just a symptom. My co-host and good friend is Chaplain Carrie Friedman. Would you share something about yourself?
Sure, John. Thank you. My name is Carrie Friedman, and I am the author of those two books that you see on the screen and a few others, including the forthcoming superhero handbook for cops. And I began an association with the law enforcement, with the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit back in 2000, I guess it was, helping them in a project to identify what they called tools for intentional spirituality. I've been working in the police community ever since then. I helped them to identify many tools for intentional spirituality, and I consult and I train at agencies all over the country, bringing a message of spiritual survival for law enforcement. The notion that police officers are intensely spiritual people, and in order to be able to function in this career, which is intensely spiritual in its demands and in its nature, they need to be aware of that side of themselves, that aspect of themselves, and they need to be able to make frequent replenishments, deposits into their accounts of spirituality. Given the fact that the career is stressful spiritually and it's draining them all the time, they have to be mindful of that, and they have to counter that process of the depletion with all kinds of deposits as well. So my teaching consists of that kind of stuff. Obviously, spiritual survival translates very easily into ethical kind of behavior, because ethics is just applied spirituality. So that's the role that I play. I'm very, very proud to be Associate Director of the Law Enforcement Survival Institute and to be John's sidekick, and I'm thrilled to be here today.
Oh, sidekick. I love it. And let me skip back up here because this is the topic we brought up for today. And what a great transition that was, because, how do we maintain our ethics? How do we maintain our resilience? How do we become well? How do we become proficient at what we do? There are so many things that feed into that. But in some conversations we were both having recently, we came up with this as the topic for today. So let me just read through this, and then I'm going to put my face back up on the screen. But we asked the questions: who inspired you in your career or perhaps in your life? Who has mentored you? Or maybe who was your hero? We kind of wondered, was there a particular someone who inspired you to become a cop or mentored you once you were on the job? Perhaps a father who worked narcotics, or an aunt who worked in homicide? Perhaps a tough but fair sergeant, or your FTO, or some salty old veteran? In addition to telling you hilarious war stories, perhaps dished out some great guidance that has helped you in your career, no matter how long that career is. And maybe that mentorship or that influence came from somebody you've never even met. So what we want to talk about today, and we'll just see how long this goes, but we want to know, what specifically did they do, and how did they inspire you? How did they teach you? And maybe what did they teach you? That's what we kind of want to talk about today. So let me bring my face back up here. Stop that. Yay. So Carrie, do you want me to take the lead, or you want to jump in yet? Doesn't matter to me.
Well, I'll be very happy. I'll let you run this show, but I'll just, as you were describing the topic for this webinar, I remembered something that once happened to me. I hope anybody who's out there in internet land who is listening to this, I want you to be very I want you to be confident. Anything that anyone ever tells me, I'm very careful not to share. I'll never betray somebody's personal information. If I do share an idea, because so much of our training is refined, and our understanding of what cops need, our understanding of those things is refined by our interactions with the cops with whom we deal all over the country. So we learn from our experiences and our interactions. The things they tell us are very, very important to us. It's invaluable. John, I think you could confirm that you might have a bunch of ideas, but when you test them and you get the feedback from the cops, that's when it becomes really real, and we tweak what we do. We refine it so that it's the absolute best and the most helpful for the cops out there that we train. So I will tell stories, but I'm always very careful to make sure that there are no identifying details. But I was in Washington. I was part of a program. There was a conference, and it was a very exclusive kind of group. It was very select. I was sitting and trying to figure out how I had been invited to it. But there I was. So there were not a lot of people, and there were some important conversations going on. And at one point during one of the breaks, somebody, and this is the point where I'm very, very careful to maintain confidentiality, but one of the people, this person is almost near the top of the law enforcement chain in the United States. I mean, they are one of the top ranking law enforcement officials that we have in America. So he, yeah, that narrows it down a little bit. But if you were to count down, half a dozen slots from the top down in terms of law enforcement order, the hierarchy in this country. So the fellow pulls me aside, takes me outside, and he said to me, "I'm familiar with your work. I heard you speak earlier. I think you did a nice job. And somebody mentioned to me, as we were discussing what you had said, somebody mentioned as an aside, kind of humorously, that you wrote a book about Batman." So I smiled, because I get a lot of ribbing for that, because here I am functioning in a very, serious kind of world. Law enforcement is not a joking matter. And we deal with things that John and I and our associates at the Law Enforcement Survival Institute, we're coming up with training to literally save lives, careers, the honor of the profession, families. This is serious stuff. So especially when I'm in Washington in one of those buildings with all those marble pillars, and everybody's wearing a suit and a tie, and we're taking it seriously. When somebody mentions Batman, I get a little nervous, because I'm not sure where they're going to go with it. So he said to me, somebody mentioned to me, they whispered to me that you wrote a book about Batman. Is that true? So I smiled and I said, I did. And I wasn't sure where we were going with that. So he said, "I'll tell you something." He said, "I'll confide this to you." He said, "When I was a little boy, when I was 6, 7, 8, he said, the Batman had just," and when he said the Batman, I knew this guy was real.
That's a clue.
That's exactly. He's not one of those guys joking around, one of those, Johnny-come-latelys who jump on. So he said, when I was that age, 6 or 7 or 8, he said it wasn't too long after the Batman had debuted. The first issue of Batman's appearance in Detective Comics, Detective 27, was May of '39. So the guy was dating himself a little bit, and it wasn't too long after that. He said, but I would lie awake in my bed at night, and I would look up at the ceiling over my bed. And he said, and I wasn't able to sleep, because I'd be lying there, I'd be thinking to myself, when will I ever grow up to be a hero like the Batman? He said, so I was kind of digesting. I was trying to deal with that image of this man is like an older man in front of me. and, trying to picture him as a little boy of 6 or 7 or 8, and lying in bed on a hot night and the windows are open and, in the tenements, everything, he's looking up at the ceiling. When will I be a hero? And he said, and today I am.
Cool.
And that was all that he said to me. He took me by the arm and he steered me back into the conference room, and the thing resumed. Now, there was a person who was inspired, and the person who inspired him wasn't even a real person. It was the Batman. But there's a certain concept, there's an image of that. And I think that when we talk about the topic today, who inspired you, who mentors you, I think in the description that you read before, it's a very broad kind of description of who can inspire us. A lot of times it's real people. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's fictional characters. This guy spent his entire life pursuing greatness, accomplishment in the law enforcement field in America. And he grew up to be a hero, a real life hero who has impacted the lives of our entire country, all the people in this country. And he's done amazing work. He's been a superhero in his own way. Yes. So you're thinking to yourselves, like, wait, who inspires me? Allow yourself to think, don't laugh. Like if you were watching The Lone Ranger or other kinds of portrayals of law enforcement officers around, that's serious stuff. And you should relate to it in a very serious kind of way, because a lot of inspiration comes out of that.
Well, I love that. And I was going to share, when I teach, frequently I'll ask the question about who's your hero? Because law enforcement has a real fuzzy relationship with the concept of heroism. I've never met a hero yet who owned it, said, okay, I'm a hero.
Right.
And most law enforcement officers will say, oh, no, I'm not a hero, and, I can never be a hero, blah, blah, blah. But when you ask them about who their hero is, that's an easier discussion. And so I love the discussion about superheroes and heroes that are super. Because I think that's a whole different issue. And so the second phase of that, I'm just planting some seeds out there. I'm hoping some of you will engage us into some discussion. And by the way, I wanted to point out that right below, or at least where my face is on this, there's a chat button. So if you don't want to talk and you don't want to turn on your video camera, you can send us a chat and then share some of your ideas with us that way, and we'll moderate that. But, the second phase of that is, so who's your hero, and then whose hero are you? Because that's a different question altogether. And that gets people thinking, well, I'm probably a hero to my children. I might be a hero to the children that I come across in my daily activities. I've gone to talk at a school, or, but it's those kind of discussions that we really want to have happen. Is we want to start getting people to think about what inspires them and who inspires them in this profession, because we all acknowledge that you kind of need that fuel in your fuel tank to keep going.
Right.
And then we'd like to kind of tear apart that mechanism a little bit and maybe reverse engineer it and find out, what was the influence? How did it come? And then how can we leverage that? How can we leverage it for you? How can we leverage it for everybody? So that those that don't feel like they've received enough or any can seek it out and can construct it properly.
Right. It's an excellent point. At this point, maybe I don't know if anybody who is out there in our viewing audience, if anybody wants to write in, or they can reveal themselves or anything like that. We can keep talking forever, but if they want to chime in.
Don't force us.
All right, that's right. We'd love you have to say. This notion of inspiring, we talk about the Law Enforcement Survival Institute. We have the Tactical Resilience and Ethical Policing project. And those are two concepts, but I think it's important always to go back to first principles. And I think this is a very, very fundamental truth that we've learned at LESI, which is that John likes to talk about tactical resilience. And I like to focus on ethical policing. The point, what LESI has realized over the years, and what we've learned in our training and our experience, our interactions with cops, is that the two qualities seem to be very different, and training can approach those things in very different ways, but they converge. So John likes to focus on the notion of maintaining wellness, of helping cops in all their different dimensions, the physical, the mental, the emotional, the cognitive, the somatic, in all the different realms, the social, the professional, and all of them, to be resilient and to be able to deal with the stresses of the job and to bring one's best and to be able to heal and to process them efficiently. What I focus on is ethical behavior, the kind of forces, the influences, the factors that contribute to maintaining a high ethical standard. And what we've found over the years is that those converge very naturally. The kind of factors, the activities that support tactical resilience, in the end, also contribute to ethical policing. And ethical policing is an important ingredient of the overall tactical resilience picture. So however we approach this, we converge in the same place. And the same place is integrity, health, and community trust. So that always is that's the starting point, and that's the ending point of everything that we're doing. In terms of this notion of inspiring, I'm kind of one-dimensional. I have an image in my training that I introduce. You'll find it in my book, Spiritual Survival for Law Enforcement, and all my training programs. I talk about the 3 accounts of spirituality. This is something that I've seen over the years, and I think it's been confirmed by a lot of experience, a lot of research. But the 3 accounts of spirituality that I identify are these. Number 1 is faith in something. It can be faith in God. It has to be faith in some source of truth which is external to and higher than ourselves. If our source of ethics, if what we understand to be right or wrong is not absolute, but is more or less relative, or whatever I happen to think it is at this moment, we're going to get ourselves into a lot of trouble. But if our sense of what's right and wrong comes from some absolute source of ethics, which is external to us and higher than us, so then we're in pretty good shape. For many people, that's a belief in God. It can be a belief in the constitutional system of the United States. It can be in the notion of the sanctity of human life, of justice, of protecting the innocent and the weak from those who would prey on them. Whatever the source is, that's account number 1, faith in something higher than ourselves. Account number 2 is regard for other people. It's the sense that other people matter, the work that we do, that we should put ourselves out for them, that there's something in humanity that's worth taking care of. And count number 3 is confidence in self. The notion that, we believe we have regard for ourselves as well, that we can accomplish something in the world. I think that the spiritual aspect of a person, not the religious, we're never talking about religion, but the spiritual in the sense of what makes us uniquely human. The reservoir deep inside, the source of us, of our hopes, our values, our aspirations, our desire to do something good in the world, that's the spiritual part of a human being. We don't ever talk about religion so that nobody's ever uncomfortable. Religion is an expression of the spirit, nothing more than that, and that's a glorious thing. But we talk about the spiritual aspect. So the spiritual aspect of a person contains those 3 elements. Our relationship, the source, John mentioned, fuel in the tank. What is it that we put into ourselves that nourishes us? And that's account number 1. Primarily, our faith in some source of truth higher than ourselves. Account number 2, regard for people. Account number 3, confidence in self. And when you think about somebody inspiring us, like that story that I mentioned before about the little boy who was thinking about the Batman, you can see how the notion of being inspired by somebody that we know personally is probably even more powerful. But being inspired by somebody has the capacity to replenish all 3 of those accounts. Because probably if we were inspired by a person, it was because he or she lived a life of value, or lives a life of value. They stand for something higher than themselves. They're used to sacrifice and hard work for an ideal. They're principled people. If they were no good, it's kind of hard to imagine that they're going to be, inspiring anybody to do anything decent in the world. But if they're people who talk the talk and walk the walk, they actually live the high-minded ideas they talk about, they represent something. So interacting with them, just being around them, refills that account number 1. The faith in and commitment to something higher than ourselves. The regard for people, when we recognize that there are people in the world who are like this, and that, we can be like this, we can contribute towards this, that there are people who are running around in the world. They're not just bad guys out there. There are people who are kind of amazing. amazing. And they're willing to live and to sacrifice for their principles, to die for what they believe in and to live for what they believe in. And then number three, when we recognize that we can become those kind of people ourselves, that inspiration, if we know them personally and they believe in us. So being inspired by somebody, being around somebody who is inspirational, has the capacity to replenish all three of those accounts. If that happens, by my definition of spiritual health, which is accounts which are, being filled all the time, this is a wonderful tool for intentional spirituality. When I was working with the behavioral science unit of the FBI, and we were trying to come up with tools for intentional spirituality, one of the greatest we identified was to be able to recognize who is your inspiration. What is the source of your inspiration? And how do you reconnect with that on a frequent basis? It's not just enough to have had it once, but to be doing it all the time with whatever frequency would be meaningful, but to keep checking into the source of your inspiration and say, oh, that, and to remind yourself, that's why I do what I do. The power of that to replenish, to nurture, to nourish, to keep us strong, to keep us ethically clear, it's incalculable.
Thank you for that. I'm going to ask you in a minute about inspiration you've received, and I'm going to share some of mine. I thought I would read something that somebody emailed me. They said they couldn't be here, but they said they remember when they were a rookie, there was an old sergeant that kind of was very gruff and always a little rough with everybody, but at the same time was kind of nurturing. And he says, at one point he got on me about making sure I always do the right thing. And I asked him, Sarge, how do I know I'm doing the right thing? And his answer was, well, son, if you could do it in front of your grandmother and she'd approve, you're probably doing the right thing. Now, unless your grandmother is Ma Barker, I think that's pretty good inspiration. But
excellent.
It reminded me when I started doing some of this kind of internal homework, I can remember when I was in probably the 5th grade. I grew up in Denver. I still live in the Denver metropolitan area of Colorado. The Denver police came to our school and did a canine demonstration. And I remember thinking, oh, that's so cool. The dogs are cool. The officers look cool in their uniforms. I could never do that, but I remember that. It was a long time ago. When I was in college, I used to work in the dormitories at night. And the university police would come around and check on us. We had coffee on the burner, and so they would always come in and check on us and get a cup of coffee. And one of those people kind of took me under his wing, and probably is the most influential in getting me to actually believe I could be a police officer. His name was Paul Schroeder, and he used to take me out on ride-alongs and share all kinds of wisdom about the profession, not just the tactics and the techniques, but kind of the why. That motivated him. And as I became an officer myself, I started as a reserve deputy, and then I became a commissioned police officer at a municipal police department. I remember having a hero. There was somebody I worked with who had been involved at that time, I think in 2 shootings, later on several more. And he always typified the courageousness that this job takes, because he was in some pretty harrowing situations, and he handled it really well. And I will mention him by name as well, because his name is Joe Padilla. He retired a couple of years ago as a captain from the Denver Police Department, and had won numerous medals and the Medal of Valor, and had done all kinds of things. But one of the reasons Joe is actually one of our faculty members at the Law Enforcement Survival Institute is because he has a really excellent program talking about what the ramifications are even of a good shoot. After all the backslapping is over and, everybody goes away, then you have to deal internally with self-doubt about I could have been killed, what would have happened to my family, we do all this what if. We train ourselves to think what if, and so after even a legitimate good shoot, we will do that. And then all the other things about should I have done this, should I have done that, all kinds of second guessing. And then we start to see, some post-traumatic stress. And Joe does an excellent job of talking about that. The last person that I want to mention is a true mentor to me. And so here's the book that I wrote, Armor Yourself. But if you look, The foreword was written by Coach Robert Lindsay, who started his career long ago with the New Orleans Police Department. He worked there for a long time. He ended up as retiring as a lieutenant, as a colonel from the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office in Louisiana. And he is a true mentor. Anybody that's a law enforcement trainer probably knows Coach Lindsay, because he has mentored more people in our profession than anyone I can ever imagine. And one of the things that I want you to know about him, and he'll be the first to share, and I'd rather you hear it all from him than from me, but you know, he had very huge ups in his career, but he also had some very deep downs. And, you know, he's very open with people about, you know, he lost everything. He lost his family, he lost his home, he lost his God. And, you know, he was living in his car and showering in the bathroom. And, you know, he's real clear about problems that he created, that he learned from the hard way, and likes to let other officers know that they don't have to go through that. And that's a true mentor. So, you know, they're out there. I've experienced a number, and I just think that we need to be looking for them. So, Carrie, you want to talk about inspiration?
So Coach Lindsay, he's kind of awesome. I've had the pleasure to interact with him at a whole bunch of ILETA conferences, and it's interesting that I wasn't privileged to know the other people you mentioned, but I think that an important feature of somebody who was an inspiration is that he's just bursting. He just feels a very intense need to share and to help others who are walking this path. And if he can spare them any kind of hurt or pain based on his own experiences, I think that's his greatest happiness. And that has implications when we think about the people who are our mentors, and when we think about the idea of making ourselves mentors to others. As we're talking, we did a little bit of preparing, and we do some running through certain ideas and scenarios before we do these webinars, but we leave a certain amount of it to be free form so that in the moment we can think things up and there's a certain spontaneity. And I was thinking about something which occurred, and again, it's a Batman themed kind of experience, but I love the Batman. What can I tell you? Anybody who's heroic loves the Batman. The reason for that, of course, is what the Batman represents, that there's no gift, nothing is given, there are no powers, nothing is a gift in life. If you want to accomplish, you have to work really hard. So that means a lot of push-ups and sit-ups. It means a lot of time in the library studying. It means a lot of practicing, a lot of sacrifice of personal comfort right now in order to reach a larger goal down the line. And because of that, I'm always surprised, happily surprised. I'm not really surprised, I'm just gratified to see that tons of cops all over the country, wherever I go, when they find out about the Batman, they're all into it. We start talking about that. But I was speaking at a conference for police leaders, chiefs, deputy chiefs, things like that, all kinds of admin type people. And at one point during the day, there was a break in the action, and predictable. The trajectory of these stories, they tend to be very similar. Fellow approaches me. Actually, he's in the lead, but there are 2 or 3 guys with him, and he identifies himself as the chief of a pretty major Midwest city. And he said, what you were talking about just now about staying ethical and about having certain parameters in place, things that remind us, that bring us back, objective kind of reference points that we can use to assess our behavior. Are we remaining ethical? Because people have a shocking capacity to fool themselves and to talk themselves, to rationalize the most immoral behavior. If you leave somebody just in their head for any length of time, they will start making calculations, they'll start cutting corners, and if you leave them to themselves for any period of time, at the end of that process, you can barely recognize the person. If they were to really think about it, they would barely be able to recognize themselves. We're able to rationalize away anything. So I was talking in this program about having some kind of external reference point to be able to navigate by the North Star. That's what I was talking to this group about. And I was helping to identify for themselves and for the people they lead, what's your North Star? How do you identify that absolute source of ethics, not relative, but absolute, and how do you connect back with it? And how do you inspire the people who work for you, the sworn personnel? How do you help them identify that North Star? All of it, of course, as I said, I mean, a big part of my work is to talk about things of, spirituality and ethics without defaulting to religious kind of imagery or terminology that makes some people uncomfortable. So during one of the breaks, this fellow approaches me and he said to me, I just want to tell you, we have a little ritual in my agency. He said, when we're changing from our civilian clothes into our uniforms, he said, it's a closed group. Not everybody's invited, and most people don't know that this group exists. He says, there are 6 of us. He said, each one of us has something on us that is Batman themed, that has a Batman logo, or it has some kind of Batman image that reminds us. He said, I have a t-shirt. He said to me, I have a t-shirt on. He says that has a Batman image. So I stopped him right there and I said to him, every day of my life, and I don't know if you want to edit this afterwards, John, you can get rid of this, but I'll make a shocking admission, but every day of my life since I was 9, I have worn a Batman t-shirt. I have about 60 of them right now, and I retire some and I get new ones. But I said to him, I stopped and I said, yeah, I understand that. He said, excellent, right. All the great law enforcement.
They're everywhere.
Love the Batman. That's right. If we let this camera pan out, if I moved around, you'd see some Batman statues.
Here too.
Oh, yeah. So he said, and he pointed to 2 of these guys who were standing there kind of sheepishly. He said, that guy there, and he says to him, go ahead, show him. So he starts fumbling with his sleeve, and he has a tattoo of the bat symbol. And he said, other people, he said, we have strict agency requirements, restrictions. He says, people can't have like necklaces or bracelets or anything. He said, so, one guy though has like a coin, some kind of a coin that has some kind of Batman imagery on it. And he said, each one of us, we have something. And he said, every day before we go out and we start our shifts, we say to each other, I affirm the truths of what this represents. Not the childish kind of stuff, but the real thing. Like, this is an image of somebody who has worked hard and has sacrificed to make of themselves, to become the kind of person who can go out into the world and make a difference and be heroic and enhance the lives of other people. Somebody who is not prone to ethical degeneration. They don't erode their value system, that they stay strong. They're clear about what their values are. He said, and as we're saying those kinds of things, we say to ourselves, we're going to maintain the highest levels of integrity, such that if the Batman were to know us, now this is like a mixing of fiction and nonfiction. Like, this is a real life chief. He says, what's that?
It's pretty powerful, actually.
It's unbelievable. But, he retired recently, but, he led an agency proudly. His career was a very, very proud one. And he said, and we look and we say, we're going to be somebody that were the Batman to know us. He'd be impressed by us. He would recognize us. He would see within us his own values. And I was blown away by that. And I said to him, I appreciate your sharing that with me. I won't tell anybody, obviously, but it's a beautiful thing. And to have that mechanism at any moment they have with them, it's a ritual. And the rituals are important in the creation of, to remind us of to impress certain truths upon ourselves. But that's a daily ritual in which they engaged to keep themselves grounded spiritually and ethically. I love that.
Thank you. I love that too, actually. And I have taught about ritual in the past, but not quite as in depth about how that really reinforces mindset. It really reinforces our values. It has a tremendous, supportive factor. And we do it so unconsciously, we don't recognize that we're actually doing rituals. And yet this law enforcement profession is steeped in rituals. And I hope they will never go away. So thank you very much for sharing that. I thought maybe we should talk just a little bit. I don't see anybody raising their hand or sending me any chats about their inspiration. So I thought maybe we just talk about this concept of mentorship for a little bit. because as Carrie said earlier, at the Law Enforcement Survival Institute, we try to find best practices that sort of reinforce all the things we're talking about, because we want you to be successful. We want you, the way I put it is, we want you to, get to Ollie Ollie Oxenfree in your career and live happily ever after. And yet I don't think a lot of our peers do that, because we struggle and we suffer. And sometimes I think we think that's part of the job, and perhaps it is, but I think there are ways to learn to manage it better. And so mentorship is a concept that we really believe in, and mentorship is something that we find at very few agencies. So I just thought we should talk about that concept a little bit, because I think many people don't understand it. And we've been talking about it since we started today here, but we haven't really labeled it. And it's true mentorship, and a lot of organizations and businesses make it a conscious tactic, whereas law enforcement, I don't think, has learned that so much. The military is probably much better at it. But a couple of things that I want people to understand is that mentorship is very different than what we have now. It is non-supervisory. So your FTO might be a mentor, but that's not a mentoring relationship. Mentoring is not coaching. There can be coaching relationships, but mentoring is not that either. So I think a lot of people misunderstand that mentoring is something that, kind of what we've been talking about, something that inspires, something that guides, ideas from somebody who's been there and is a little wiser, probably is a good definition of mentorship. And we believe that organizations need to have this as a goal and make it formal. And we offer a class. We have a couple of instructors, and Carrie and I would both be willing to be part of that as well. We have instructors that just teach mentorship. But it's a little bit unusual for our profession, and I think that's wrong. I can probably count on one hand the number of agencies that I've found that actually have a true mentorship program, even though, for example, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the IACP, of which we're members, actually advocates mentorship. They have some guidelines about it, and they offer a mentorship program for young police chiefs, and certainly police chiefs in large communities as well as small communities. So mentorship is something that we think can happen at any level in the organization. Probably should start right when somebody's hired, maybe even before they've graduated from the academy, because a mentor could certainly help you through the academy without, cheating or having you, they're not guiding you, they're not supervising you, they're just encouraging you. And, I'm certain that there are plenty of sergeants out there that would have liked a older, wiser sergeant to formally mentor them. Some probably had that, some probably didn't. And it goes up through the ranks. And it can happen in any of the jobs in law enforcement, people that work crime scenes, people that work in communications. We could have mentorship everywhere, but we really don't have it anywhere. And I think that's kind of a problem.
Right. I think that just going to jump in, just one observation, and I'm going to hand it back to you because the point you're making is a very important one. But the notion of mentorship is important. I mentioned before that John, of course, is the executive director of the Law Enforcement Survival Institute. We refer to it as LESI. He's the executive director. I am associate director. There are a number of people who are associate directors, and there are people who, a wonderful faculty. The trainers are the best, and they bring all kinds of different specialties with them. We talk about, I mentioned before, those two categories, tactical resilience and ethical policing. And while they seem to be different, they converge in the end, and the product that they produce is an officer who has a greater sense of wholeness, of inner peace, of inner clarity, of aware of what it is that he or she is doing in the career and how to keep themselves healthy. And it also produces a greater standard of ethical behavior. All of that produces community communities that are happy, that are content, they're confident in their officers. Mentorship works on all those levels. For tactical resilience includes, and John defined, he created that term, and he can tell you about the characteristics, like what tactical resilience, what it encompasses. It encompasses a lot of things. It encompasses a lot of the mechanics of doing the job well and in a way that doesn't eat a person up. It can consume the career, as you know, I'm sure, as you've seen in other people or in yourselves. The career can eat people up. The people who do the job well for any length of time, it can eat away at them.
Sorry, I'm trying to bring up the slide. It's having a hard time. There you go.
Right. Okay. So tactical resilience is the quality. It's a whole set of skills that a person can learn to keep themselves healthy. And mentorship is an important skill. It's an important quality, a tool. If a person is really in pursuit of tactical resilience, to have a mentor is a great thing. If a person is involved, is interested, their ambition is to police ethically. So again, a mentor, a good one, is one of the most powerful tools that a person can have. So mentorship is an example. I don't think you could find a faculty member on the Lessee staff, and there are many of them. Like I said, they're all world class. If we were to go through and give you a list of who those people are, you'd be kind of in awe of who they are. And I invite you to look on the website and to just scroll down, look at the names of the people. I think the idea of having a mentor, and we'll talk about towards the end of this, being a mentor to someone else, those are some of the most powerful tools that you can have. And if you don't have that in place, I hope one of the things that will come out of today's training is that you'll think seriously about how to get yourself a mentor. And like I said, perhaps as important, if not more important, to become a mentor yourself to other people.
Thank you. Good point. I think we should transition to that because we're kind of rounding the 3/4 hour. But, John Maxwell comes to mind. I didn't put a list of resources in front of me, but John Maxwell is kind of a well-known leadership guru who has one book on mentoring that I've liked. There are a number of books out there. Mentoring can be a really formalized process. In fact, I encourage it to be kind of formalized so that it isn't just lackadaisical. But I think Terry's got a good point. If you don't have a mentor, go find one. But you need to tell them, I would like you to mentor me. I want to learn from your wisdom. And that probably means, instead of just chatting over coffee every now and then, that would work. But it probably means, as you saw in the definition of tactical resilience, the word we use a lot is about being intentional. So intentional means, making it happen, having a plan. And for mentorship, that probably means scheduling appointments, sort of like, we're doing with these talks. Scheduling appointments, having regular communications, asking questions, and choosing specific topics to talk about, and not just allowing it to be random. Not saying that randomness could be a problem, but be intentional. You want to jump in on that?
Well, I just think that I think the idea of having a mentor. We started the hour talking about being inspired by people, and the notion of being inspired. A lot of times, the stories that I was telling, for example, or that you were telling, or episodes in our respective youth. And that's something which is important. And, a lot of the training that I present involves reconnecting with the sources of that inspiration. But when we talk about an inspiration, and when I was 6 or 7, or when I was in college, those are things that are in the past. And a way to recreate that inspiration and to have that image powerful, like to restore it right in front of our eyes so that it's imminent, is in the form of a mentor. Because that brings it into the present, brings us into the future. That's a very powerful kind of thing. The aspect of mentorship that I see, I think there are several. I mentioned before the idea of having some kind of a source of ethics that is external to a person. And having a mentor is one of the greatest of those sources, because then you have to choose well. Don't choose a bad mentor. You choose somebody whom you admire, somebody who has a track record. The way they live their lives tells you, it doesn't mean that they have to be perfect or that they had to have always been perfect. It means that it could be that they walked a kind of a tough path, but they got to a point of clarity where they've learned from their mistakes, they've lived a lot of life, they've had a lot of experience, and at crucial moments, they made the right decisions, or they chose to redefine themselves as the kind of person who is worthy of respect and trust. If you find a person like that, that's more valuable than gold. Grab onto them. And I think that what you're trying to get out of them is the fact that a mentor is that external source of objectivity. It's a reference point that's not you. If you spend your life in your head, you're going to come out at the end, you will have come up with all kinds of analyses, you will have justified all kinds of behavior that's not right. And I deal with the aftermath of that all the time in the trainings that I do. I get called to agencies who too often, I'd like to be called before, when everybody's healthy, everybody's behaving properly, there are no ethics scandals, nobody's been fired or arrested. I would love that. But more often than not, I'm called in after all hell has broken loose and somebody, there's been some fiasco or other. And then I go in to give a message of ethical behavior. Far better to connect with somebody beforehand who will, and you have to make yourself, this is a very important decision to make. It's not a relationship into which you enter lightly. And John, I think you can confirm that. A mentor is not somebody, it's not casual if you want to get the fullest benefit of it. What that means is you have to have somebody in your life who can say to you, no. Or say to you, what are you, nuts? And what you're saying, like, you're fooling yourself. And if you can have a relationship where you make it clear that, they talk about the power of previous decision, but you've decided at some point, you don't have to be slavishly, loyal to the person where you never think at all. But what it means is that you enter into a relationship and you're serious about it and you say, I will really take, serious with all the energy and all the seriousness, all the, it's a very solemn process. I'm going to really think about what you say and I'm going to consider it. And what you say carries a lot of weight. And if you have somebody who's not you, who can listen to you and say to you, no, you're wrong. You're wrong about that. You're fooling yourself. You're lying to yourself. I have a relationship. I have my own mentor. And there have been many times in my life where I've brought, my plans. I've got great plans. I'm going to do this or that. And he'll listen to me and he'll say to me, you're fooling yourself. You're fooling yourself. And that objectivity, that external voice, that voice that's external to me can suddenly bring me up short. And I look at it with new eyes and go, oh my gosh, right. Of course. Like, what was I thinking? In the absence of that mentor, I can't even tell you what I might have done. I think there's something else, which is, and this is a powerful human motivator, is a sense of embarrassment. Because what you were saying before about, would you do it in front of your grandmother? To have a mentor, an inspiration is somebody from the old days, but they might not be around. And we might pretend that they wouldn't be trouble. But if you have a mentor, a living figure in front of you, and on Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the morning when we have coffee together, and I'm going to be embarrassed to admit, I don't want to be embarrassed in front of this person. And that allows people to walk a certain path that they might otherwise not have walked if they were just left to themselves. So the idea of having a mentor, John mentioned that he has a lot of material on how to create a mentoring program. It's something that you don't do casually. It's not a difficult thing to set up. That relationship, it's kind of easy to establish, but it's life-saving and life-enhancing. So at the end of this, this happened last month after the webinar. A whole bunch of people contacted me, people who had either been participants on the program, and some people spoke, and I really valued their contributions. Some people were on, but they didn't say anything. Some people responded to us right afterwards. They emailed us, and then when John posted it on the Cops Alive channel, people watched it, and they got in touch with us. And I don't know about you, John, weigh in on this. I loved it. Everything that every person wrote, what they wrote or when they called, they had great things to say. Honestly, I wish they had said it while the program was going on, but it's okay. It'll help us in the future. And it's important for us to know that there are people out there who are listening and who are getting something from it. But what I would say to you is I invite you at the end of this program, if you would like to get any information, any material from us, in the last month, I spent probably about a dozen hours speaking with people from various agencies around the country who were asking for clarification about what we talked about last time. So I hope that will happen this time. And if you're curious about anything, I invite you to contact either of us. And if you can spread the word, please. If you know people, there are a lot of people out there who are hurting. There are a lot of people out there who could use the enhancements that we offer. If you can share this, we're going to be doing this once a month, at least in the beginning, at least once a month. And if you can let the word out to your community, if you contact us and you tell us what kind of issues you'd like to see us address, we'll have open mic at times, often, so people can weigh in and they can bring their concerns and ask questions in real time. And we'll give you the absolute best of our experience and training. The best material we have, it doesn't cost anything, as you can see. You sign on to this, you participate, we'll do anything we can to help you out, because it's important to us that you succeed. We do what we do because we feel a sense of mission to support the heroic, noble, brave beyond men and women who do the job of policing in this beautiful country of ours.
Thank you. And we've even got some ideas for some special guests, some of our instructors, maybe some other people. So we're going to try to make this as useful for you as possible. And to that end, I thought maybe we would give you some homework. I like to do that when I write, when I teach. If this topic intrigues you at all, I encourage you to do some exploration. And Carrie just said it. Feel free to reach out to us. I have a list of books about mentoring specifically. Our emails are kind of long when it involves the Law Enforcement Survival Institute. So why don't you send one to me at editor@copsalive.com, and I'll forward anything to Chaplain Friedman. And so ask us some questions. Why don't you do a little research? Why don't you do some research on the web? There are plenty of mentoring programs out there in corporate world. They're going to be adapted. They're not exactly like our profession, but they could be adapted. So here's the homework I have for you. Think about researching the concept of mentorship. And then perhaps experiment a little bit and get yourself a mentor. Go and ask somebody, even if it's a one-off session, go and ask somebody to sit and give you some wisdom on a topic. And then, I would challenge you to go forward even more, because I think we learn more when we teach than when we sit on our butts and learn. So I would encourage you to find somebody that you can mentor, even if it's a one-off again, where you choose some wisdom perhaps that you pick up from this exploration, and you take somebody who's probably not as experienced in this profession as you, and you share that with them. And I encourage you to examine that a little bit and see how it feels. Then the last thing I would say, obviously, we think that mentorship has a place in law enforcement. We would like to see more programs, so I encourage you to start a program. This is not a sales pitch, because it's not inexpensive to bring a number of us into your agency to do that. However, probably more effective if you can draw on the wisdom that we have. Nonetheless, start a program and see how it goes. But it needs to be sort of formalized. Any thoughts about that, Carrie? Because I know we've got just a transition and another topic to sort of wrap up with, and we're going to talk about next time as well.
I think it's a great idea. The homework that John gave, fantastic. I would just say my own homework from today. So I would ask you, is it possible for you to have a conversation with the person who inspired you all those years ago? Are they still active? Are they still somewhere within your vicinity that you could reach out to them? If they are, if there's some way for you to reach them, I would invite you to contact them and to say to them, so much of the good that I've done is because of you, like what you inspired me to do, and I appreciate that. I think that's a wonderful thing. I think all of these are tools for intentional spirituality in the sense that they ground us and they restore us. After you've done the kinds of things that you've done in your job, the things that you've seen, nobody can ever go back, nor would they want to. You wouldn't want to go back to a place of naive idealism. That might have been what brought you into the career in the first place. But it's possible to get to a place of mature idealism. The idealism and your experiences in life, a little tempered, the naivete doesn't exist so much anymore. But to get back to a place of idealism, ethical behavior, those are all perishable skills. and they dissipate with time, and they dissipate with experiences. We see things in the course of living our lives that confuse us ethically, and it's not so clear as we go through our lives, like what's right. So perishable skills, you've been taught many of them. The way that you get good at them, you maintain your skill level, is that you practice and you keep going back and you do it over and over and over again. So ethical clarity, ethical behavior, idealism, integrity, all of those are perishable skills. And you prop those skills up, you restore them when you perform those tools for intentional spirituality. And to have a conversation, if you can do it in real life, that would be the best. If you can't, even in your mind's eye, to turn inward and imagine, say to yourself, if I could talk to that person again, what would I tell them? How would I describe to them the career, the path that I've walked? Did I live up to what I was supposed to? What I made them proud? Would they be proud to see what I've become? If the answer to those things is maybe not the most, so then I bet you'd be able to figure out what you need to do to get to a place where you could, with head held high, you could turn to that source of your inspiration and say, look who I am. And the way to do that, I think, is in the form of having a mentor, a living example in the present, before whom you'll be, a little shy, a little embarrassed to do something wrong, who will remind you what it means, what it looks like to do it right. And John was talking about becoming a mentor to somebody else. If you have a sense of responsibility and that someone is looking up to you, and that you could mean the difference between success or, God forbid, failure in their life, in their relationship, in their career, in their sense of themselves, in every aspect of their lives, that you have a role to play, I bet you'll step up your game a little bit. And that's one of the greatest reasons to accept responsibility for somebody else. It doesn't mean it's not going to be crushing, but to act at your noblest because someone's counting on you, that's kind of what this career is all about. So thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for joining us today. And again, I invite you, anybody if you can spread the word of these webinars, you can share you can direct them to the Cops Alive YouTube channel. Please be in touch with us. Any way we can help you, we'd love to.
And remember, the home for these is on our tacticalresilience.org website. So that would be a good place to find out the next one. We're running out of time, so I thought I would just do a quick transition. When we were talking about planning this, we wanted to at least acknowledge you have to understand that there's a negative or a reverse side to this positive concept, and that is you can be learning the wrong thing, and you can inadvertently absorb the wrong behaviors from people that should not be your mentors. And so we just had to close with that kind of transition, in that we do need to be conscious and intentional about our behavior, particularly in a profession where our behavior is under a microscope all the time. But keep in mind that some people are not the best role models for you, and you're going to have to be the one to weed that out of your life.
That's an excellent point. I was training at an agency a couple of weeks ago, and I mentioned this to John, and we chuckled about it, but it wasn't with mirth, it was with sadness. But a cop came up to me and he described his observations of one of the old timers in the agency. And the guy just kept upping the ante of unethical behavior. And it seemed that there was no end, there was no limit, and it just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And the cop, who was much younger, said to me that he was kind of troubled. He was struggling with the fact that he had learned more from observing this corrupt cop, this old timer in the agency. He learned more about ethical behavior by learning what not to do. And he said, I watched this spiral, this trajectory of his, as he just went from bad to worse to a point of, really no return. And he said to me, I could write a book. He said, the number of things that I learned from him of how, this leads to this, leads to this. So I mentioned the story to John, we were talking about it, but sometimes if a person can have the clarity, some of our most powerful teachers, they teach us what not to do. And I think we're going to do that. I think we're going to talk about that topic next time, the people who teach us what not to do, the cautionary tales within the police world. In that area, and not to be disrespectful, not at all. We don't in any way mean to be disrespectful, but sometimes those give rise to some of the stories that are the most hilarious, if painful. John, you have stories like that? You know of them? I collect them. I listen to my students, and they will tell me, they'll share things, and they go into the general treasure trove that we have of material. So next time we'll get a few laughs. It will be complex kind of laughter, because we won't be laughing at anybody and we won't be celebrating it. But the stories will be fascinating. They'll be complex, and we will share some wisdom with you, and we hope you'll share your wisdom and your stories with us.
Thank you very much. That is Chaplain Carrie Friedman. I am John Marks. We have enjoyed this time. We want to try to get more engagement, so please spread the word. And we will see you in about a month for another one of these, we call them TREPP live chat webinars. TREPP is the Tactical Resilience and Ethical Policing Project. And until then, please stay safe, and we'll see you next time.
All the best to you. Take care.